Hey, y'all, welcome to CrossPolitic on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. My voice is hanging in there. It's AmFest 2025. So good to be here. Talk Knox, Pastor Toby. What do you guys think so far of AmFest?
Oh, man, it's been wild. It's crazy. Like, there's a little bit of everything here. And
a little bit of everything.
Oh, yeah.
Totally.
A little bit of everything. It's nuts. But tons of fun.
30,000 people this year. They had like 5,000 people on the wait list. I mean, pretty.
Is that right?
Impressive. Yeah.
Many.
Yeah.
Wow.
5,000 people on the wait list.
Right.
I spent most of my time here, so knowing how the experience
I know. We've been in our studio. Yeah.
Have you been out there?
I've been out.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And this is Eyal.
Oh, no, you're supposed to let me say his name.
I was trying to save you from it. I was trying to be
What
polite.
did you call him earlier?
Do what?
What'd you call him?
I called him Yule, and then
There were a couple ones. There were a couple ones.
And then I was like,
It was like Eyal
Eyal
Yak Boy, I think it was.
Yakoby.
Yak
That's
Boy.
his last name.
That one's my favorite one, honestly.
And so how do you say your last name?
Yakoby.
I'm sorry.
Yakoby. There we go. I apologize. I'm just that way. So
I forgive you.
it's not you, it's me. So honestly, man, I don't know much about you, but we'll get into some of my interests here in a little bit. But would love if you just kind of tell about yourself, what you're doing, and all that.
Yeah. So
Any website point people to. Okay.
my name's Eyal Yakoby. I graduated college from the University of Pennsylvania 2 years ago. In the fall of my senior year, the university organized what was called the Palestine Rights Literature Festival.
Right.
And
What year was that?
this was fall of 23.
Okay. Yeah.
It was around 2 weeks before October 7th.
Okay.
And before then, things in classes would kind of bother me with, this almost communist orthodoxy that was being brewed on college campuses.
You were surprised by that?
I guess I was naive.
It is a government school.
And so they organized this conference. It was an entire menu of anti-American, anti-Semitic, anti-Christian, terror-loving speakers. And for me, it kind of shattered what I considered my academic sanctuary of somewhere where I go to school, and then you have people, being invited to campus, being paid to come to campus, that are glorifying Hamas, Hezbollah, you name it. And so I did what anyone who has ever published an article or given a speech before would do, and I published an article in my school newspaper, and it basically just called out the conference. And 2 weeks later, October 7th hits.
Yeah.
And in the preceding 2 weeks after the conference, the Hillel, which is like the Jewish organization on campus, someone broke in yelling, "Fuck the Jews."
Wow.
I don't know if I'm allowed to.
No, you're fine. Our audience understands the context.
Okay. F asterisk CK.
Too late, bro.
The Jews.
They still understand.
And the Chabad, which is another Jewish organization, was vandalized. And so, you can write off one event as being, whatever, some lunatic, but 3 in 2 weeks, it starts to become a pattern. And so we were dealing with this, and then October 7th hits, and, while I was crying, I did exactly what the Israelis and other nationalities were doing at the Nova Festival. I was out with my friends on a Friday night. I woke up in an Ivy League school. They woke up, many of them either dead in Gaza in Hamas tunnels, or, were still trying to escape the Hamas terrorists. And so I was, shattered. I went onto social media and saw 2 of my professors post, quote, "Beautiful sights to wake up to this morning."
Wow.
With images. Professors.
But did you pay, by the way?
Yeah. Right.
Got it.
And so for me, and I think where this goes back, that I don't like talking about this in the context of anti-Semitism. I like talking about it in the context of the past 5 years that we've seen in this country, where you were canceled, you were harassed, you were even attacked if you had conservative views on a college campus. If you were a professor at a college campus, you would have been fired for saying the most basic conservative principles that 50% of this country believe. But you glorify terror, you glorify violence, you glorify rape of innocent people by terrorists, and suddenly the school turns a blind eye. Suddenly there's context that's needed. And I think this all culminated, if you guys remember, at the college testimony with Elise
Remember that? I was just
Stefanik,
thinking about that when you said that. Yep.
where just calling for the genocide of Jews violate the code of conduct. and they're little squirming up there.
I have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, like,
I don't know if there's a
need to
code.
check. Like, okay, let's go back to
What is
2020
genocide?
and insert any other ethnic or racial group,
Right.
and they all would have been fired and resigned in disgrace if they gave that answer.
There were people being fired just for saying they were going to vote for Trump. Like I mean,
Exactly,
it's like
yeah.
barely conservative. You know, like you don't even have to be conservative or Christian. It's like we're going to vote for, and then like you get fired, and they're considering, you know, we're not sure exactly if this is acceptable or not to call for the genocide of a people group.
That was disheartening. Yeah.
Absolutely insane. We, Gabe and I got to visit the Nova Festival site in August.
In August, yeah.
And the memorial there is just really heartbreaking. Just totally. You know, we heard from one of the survivors that was actually there. And saw the town where a number of the terrorists came and attacked. Just incredible. But you're absolutely right. I mean, how do you get to that place? You know, in our country where for many years we knew that all the calls, like, you know, all the BLM stuff, for example, or all the we call it, you know, race hustling, you know, just the grievance hustling. Like we always knew there was, like, the left doesn't really care about that. They care about power, and they use that to gin up controversy so that they can come in as the saviors. They want to come in as the white knights. But it's like, the hypocrisy just seems insane for them to be saying, you know, no hate. You know, I mean, how many football helmets? You know, no hate.
No hate, yeah.
You know, whatever. It's like no racism, no bigotry, no prejudice, all this kind of stuff. And then they're like, you know, a bunch of Muslims are like, you know, we hate Jews and we want them to all die. And they're like, well, let's hear them out. Like, how do we get to that point?
I think it's that, you know, I think there's been this sense of cowardice in our country that people will just accept these certain, you know, pedagogy that, you know, certain things are just normal or certain things are just acceptable. And what I always go back to is it's the same people every single time. Tell me who cheered on the murder of Charlie Kirk. I'll tell you exactly what side they were on in the Israel-Hamas conflict. Tell me exactly who you rooted for, whether it was the local business owners, many of which were black, by the way, that were burned down during the BLM riots. I'll tell you exactly what side they're on with the Charlie Kirk murder and with Israel versus Hamas. And it goes down and it cascades. And so I think it's this evil ideology, and exactly what you said. It's this culture of grievances, which is exactly what Charlie Kirk was fighting against inherently.
So what do you make of Tucker's recent, you know, conversation? I mean, even the talk last night, I don't know if you caught it, you know, but, you know, he's like, it would seem to be an exception to that claim, where it's like he's like, not, you know, I'm Charlie's friend, you know, completely condemns the murder.
Would a friend say that he stands with Candace Owens as Candace Owens tears the organization that Charlie built apart?
Yeah, no, fair quick question. But he's also the one saying, you know, if one single child is dying in Gaza, this, you know, I don't know if he'd say this is a genocide, but, you know, he's calling it genocide. He's saying that there's, you know, genocide is happening there. Israelis, you know, he certainly seemed to say last night, you know, Israelis don't care about kids in Gaza. That's anti-Christian. That's immoral. That's, you know, how does that fit into that schematic where you're saying, you know, you can cheer on Charlie Kirk. I know where you stand on Israel and Hamas. Tucker would seem to be an exception to that.
I mean, look, there's going to be exceptions to any, you know, like philosophical claim, but I think it does play into the role of, you know, show me, you know, who's attacking Erica Kirk and then tell me what side they're on in the Israel-Hamas conflict. I think it's a similar, you know, notion. Maybe it's not celebration of Charlie's murder, but it's the celebration of, in you know, Mikey McCoy's and Tyler Bowyer's and Andrew Colvitt's own words, more death threats from Candace Owens fans than from Antifa.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy.
Maybe another way to frame this question would be, so on the conservative right, people like Tucker and others, who I genuinely think are still generally conservative, but have begun to question who's right, Israel or Hamas or something, or questioning the narrative or questioning something.
Well, and they would even maybe just have more frustration with Israel than anything.
Yeah.
You know,
why that shifting? We're like, again, I think historically conservatives generally were like, you know, Israel has a right to exist as a nation. Some had wacky theology surrounding it, but it was like, and terrorists are bad. Well, but why that shift on the right, you think?
I think the right currently is developing a culture of grievances, and I think it's a reaction to the woke left of, we went through years, and as a young man in this country, I'm 23 years old, I saw it in high school, I saw it in college, that every problem, according to the woke left, you could pin on the white man. That's all that happened. Right. It was years of people openly saying, like, I am anti-white. I don't like white culture, or saying white people don't have culture.
And all the problems in the world are your fault. You did this.
And now, there's a shift that it's a reactionary thing, which is something that I've been worried about for a while, where you have this new faction of the right. And I know that Tucker won't say it, but when he platforms the people that he has platformed, and it's not about platforming or deplatforming, it's about what is your responsibility as someone with millions of followers he describes himself as someone with influence. What responsibility do you have to ask the tough questions? Because if you look at the interview with Ted Cruz, and you look at the interview with, let's say, the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, he went harder on a Christian than an Islamist theocrat who enslaves his own people. And Tucker, after the fact, admitted, he goes, I didn't ask him the tough questions because he wasn't going to give me honest answers. Well, then why'd you platform him in the first place? If you know that someone will not be honest during an interview and you don't ask them tough questions, you are complicit in the spreading of Islamist propaganda on your network.
So I agreed with Ben Shapiro's criticism of Tucker and Nick Fuentes in that interview. I know. Let me state two things here. One is I like Ben. I'm friends with Tucker. I like them both. I also don't think either of them are being that accurate with each other's sides. And I also think the funny thing here is I think this conversation needs to happen, but I think if you put Ben and Tucker on the same stage at the same time, it'll be like the worst thing to ever happen. Ben,
more WAPs than the Super Bowl. It would be more WAPs than the Super Bowl.
For sure.
But I also think my quick take on this is Ben is not a goofball. He takes himself, I think, more seriously than he should, and Tucker can be very flippant. And so you put that chemical equation on the stage over this topic, and bam. But I think this conversation still happened. Now, my problem with Ben's talk last night is I agree with Ben. You got to have borders. You got to define terminology. You got to have definition of what conservatism. Truth matters, all that stuff, 100%. And he is very good on how he approached it. My issue with Ben, and this is a conversation I would like to have with Ben, is in America was we Christians defined conservatism in America. Ben is not a Christian. I think you're Orthodox Jew. Is that
secular Jew?
So you're a secular Jew? Oh, okay.
I don't wear the funny hat.
Yeah. I noticed that. I wasn't gonna.
He's gonna get on you. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Where's your funny hat?
Are you my rabbi?
Yeah.
Like, where is it?
Like I don't see color. I don't see hats. Okay.
You better see the color.
And so Ben's sitting here in America talking about conservatism and not even using the accurate definition of what conservatism is in America. It's defined by Christians.
Yeah.
And Ben, in order to be, he's inconsistent with conservatism in America by rejecting Christ. And so these are just honest discussions I'd love to have with both Tucker and Ben.
But on the point of Tucker, beyond
I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about Tucker. I want to talk about this conversation is specifically about me asking you kind of about Ben and conservatism and that kind of stuff. So,
when modern man looks around, he sees himself as one lost on a shoreless sea. He's an atom in the void. He doesn't know his right hand from his left, and his restless heart is a perpetual factory of idols. Into those modern death throes comes the central Christian confession: Christ is Lord.
New St. Andrews College aims to graduate leaders shaping culture under the lordship of Christ. We want to instill in our students a build and fight vision, animated by God's promise to bring the kingdom of Christ from heaven to earth, so that the earth is filled with the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. This is a multi-generational spiritual and civilizational construction project, and the foundation is the lordship of Jesus Christ.
His kingdom is at hand. His lordship makes all things new.
Our Lordship course is a year-long freshman colloquium in theology, designed to lay that biblical foundation. It's a mix of biblical theology, systematic theology, and practical theology that seeks to instruct the student's mind, renew their heart, and shape their actions. Throughout the year, we read great books of theology: Augustine's Confessions and City of God, Calvin's Institutes, Athanasius's On the Incarnation, and C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity and the Great Divorce. We teach students to make careful observations of the biblical text, trace biblical themes across the Bible, and understand and represent opposing viewpoints with clarity. We don't merely seek to understand the Word. We aim for our students to do the Word.
What do you, I guess maybe what would you take on my criticism of Ben of him trying to find conservatism without Christ in a country that defined conservatism on the foundation of Christ, if that makes sense?
Well, first of all, Christ was a Jew, and the
He also died for your sins.
he did, and so I guess I want to ask, what do you mean when we were founding the country? What do you exactly mean by it was founded? It was not founded as a Christian.
Oh, yes, it was.
It was founded
America.
as separation of church and state.
That's a Christian doctrine.
You sound like a liberal all of a sudden.
Yeah, now you're starting. Yeah,
I do.
So
They say.
the separation of church and state was a Christian doctrine because we believe there's a governmental authoritative distinction between the civil government and a government authoritative distinction between the church government. And so the church does not oversee civil matters, and the government does not oversee church matters. There's a governmental distinction there.
But when you look at the founding of this country, you'll see that it frequently pulled from the Old Testament specifically. When you look at the founding fathers, when they describe
They
themselves,
use Deuteronomy a ton.
and what's on
100%.
the Liberty Bell is Genesis. There's Genesis is
Yeah.
written
Oh,
in
yeah.
it. So how do you grapple with that? Is that they would pull heavily from the Old Testament?
Because the Bible's a Christian document from Genesis to Revelation. It's a consistent, it's a Christian Bible. So the Jews got the Old Testament and they got Christ wrong. So, but the whole narrative is all Christ. So all the Old Testament talks about Christ again and again, points to Christ again and again.
Okay, so then how do you grapple with, I guess, the doctrine of freedom of religion in America?
That is again a Christian doctrine, and what it.
But sorry, when I say like separation of church and state and like, religious freedom in America,
Please.
I'm in full agreement with you that Christians founded the United States of America, and it was Christian theology that was able to make America the greatest nation on the face of this planet in all of human history.
And so, but what you would be arguing by asking these questions is saying the Christian doctrine doesn't really matter in the sense that it was trying to pave way for all religions to thrive in America, and that's a false statement.
I believe in all human beings thriving in America, and I think the notion of religious freedom in America allows people from different religions, different creeds, to help build this country and make it as what it is today.
When the Constitution was ratified in 1789,
what was it? What was the first prayer that was
hang on,
said?
Let me finish this. 9 out of 13 colonies had stated denominations. So the issue was over denominations, not over the freedom to worship Allah in America. So the conversation, debate was over, hey, we don't want to have a federal denomination because we're coming from Great Britain that had a federal denomination, Anglican, okay? And so America was rejecting, that's why the freedom of religion was so important, is because you can be free to serve and be any denomination you want here in America. But it was not talking about freedom to serve Allah publicly in the United States, if that makes sense, if that distinction makes sense.
I mean, that's not true. Like, if you look at George Washington's letter to the Hebrew congregation of Rhode Island, he said specifically that you will always be able to bear fruit in this land and live under the famous quote of the vine and fig tree.
I don't have a problem with Muslims living in this land. I have a problem with public worship of their God in this land.
Wait, but
There's
we're
a
talking
big
about, are we
distinction.
talking about,
You're talking about Jews.
I can't speak to Islam. I'm talking about Judaism.
But I'm saying I don't have a problem with Jews being in the land. I have a problem with their public worship of a false God in this land.
We worship the same God.
No, you don't. You don't worship the full revealed nature of God.
It's the Abrahamic religions. We worship the same God.
You worship a incomplete definition of the fullness of who God is revealed himself through the scriptures.
Okay, so taking it back to the religious freedom aspect, I didn't realize we were going to have a theological debate.
No. I didn't know where this
I would have
conversation
prepped a little bit more.
And we're going to cut this off about 5 minutes. So
I guess if we're looking at the Constitution and we're looking all men were created in the image of God, we're looking at religious freedom, religious tolerance, and we're looking at all men are created equal. Correct?
agreed.
So I don't understand where both in the founding fathers' documents, the what they wrote, for instance, George Washington's letter to the Hebrew Congregation of Rhode Island, or the fact that when you're saying the ratification of the Constitution, the first prayer that was said was psalm. It was a psalm from the Old Testament.
Amen.
And
The Psalms are about Christ.
And I guess from your perspective, there's been a plethora of people in the country who are Jewish or not Christian who have served this nation both in uniform but also through creating business, through creating jobs. And if you're talking about Ben Shapiro's biggest advice to young Christian men in this country is not to go to synagogue, it's to go to church.
Yeah.
And I would personally argue on the point of Ben Shapiro that something about him being conflicting in his views of being Jewish and being conservative is what I'm confused about. I personally would argue that Ben Shapiro has gotten more young men to attend church than most pastors in this country.
It shows the beauty of having a
It's probably
Christian-founded constitution.
It's probably true. You're probably right.
It's a great point.
And I think what Gabe is just getting at is that there has as you just noted a minute ago, Christianity was massively significant in the founding of the country. Christianity has been massively significant in the thriving of this country, which has also, I would agree to some extent, that has then allowed for people of other faiths or no faith at all to also thrive insofar as they're willing to kind of be a part of that Christian culture. And I think the point that Gabe is trying to make is just that if that is the conservatism that built this country and really blessed this country and blessed many other people who weren't necessarily Christians themselves, don't we need to preserve that center in order to continue to enjoy those blessings?
But Jews don't proselytize. We don't try to convert Christians to Judaism. So I'm confused where they're.
And I'm fine with that in America.
What? Sorry?
I'm fine with that in America.
Oh, so
Jews not proselytizing.
It's one of our core tenets. So Jews are also fine with it. We don't proselytize anyway. But I'm saying, I guess in practicality is where is, like, when it's religious freedom, when it's, all men are created equal, when it's separation of church and state, I'm confused in practicality what exactly you're looking for then.
Like what in Ben Shapiro's stuff is inconsistent?
I mean, I would just say thank you. I would just say, he's inconsistent because he's trying to define conservatism apart from Christ. And in America, conservatism in America was defined on the foundation of Christ. But you're using terms like religious freedom in a way that I, as a Christian, would not use that term. I don't have a problem with Jews in the privacy of their own home here in America worshiping the Old Testament God. I don't have a problem with a Muslim in the confines of their home worshiping their God, whatever, praying 5 times a day. They can do whatever they want in their house. But because America is a Christian nation, what's publicly good for you is publicly to emphasize and honor the God that built this nation, which is on the foundation of Christ. And so any conflicting religion that wants to publicly worship publicly, like have a mosque or something publicly and publicly display their
prayers, Muslim call to prayers.
Public prayers, stuff like that. I'm like, that's contrary to America, and that's contrary to what built this nation. So I don't want that. I think publicly and
So relating it back to, because I think this conversation started with the speech yesterday that Ben Shapiro gave, and with Tucker Carlson, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. I'm confused where in his speech he was hypocritical to any of the tenets that he said, because I'll give you some examples, and I know you don't want to talk about Tucker Carlson, but I do think it's important in relation to what you're saying about Christianity and Ben Shapiro being a hypocrite, because I would say Tucker Carlson is the biggest hypocrite, that while he identifies as a Christian, and while he's buying a second home in Qatar, where the cross is literally banned from being displayed in public, while he had on someone to talk about the persecution of Nigerian Christians. It turned out later that that same guy was actually hired by the Nigerian Islamist government to promote propaganda for Nigeria. So when I think, and I hope you don't take any offense to this.
I don't have a problem. I think there's certain criticisms of Tucker that I have said to him personally. So I don't have a problem.
I would say that's a way more I would say one person is telling young men in America to go to church. The other one's having on the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, has interviewed, I think, Al-Thani, the head of Qatar, 3 times in the past year, who's buying a second home in Qatar, who had on someone who is a paid agent of the Nigerian government to downplay the mass slaughter of Christians in Nigeria. And it goes back to, I think, what you were saying earlier, is like, Tucker Carlson wants to talk about a genocide that's happening in Israel. More Christians have been murdered in Nigeria in this past year alone, than the 2.5-year war with Gaza.
Yeah.
And I'm including, like President Trump's estimates, 48,000 terrorists in that. So we're talking 65,000 Christians in Nigeria this year alone, and we're talking about, according to President Trump, 20,000 civilians in Gaza in a 2.5-year war. So I personally would argue that Tucker is more emblematic of something that's anti-Christian than Ben Shapiro.
So we're going to have to wrap this up. So I have no problem with you pointing that out, and I think there's some legitimacy to what you point out. I got friends doing ministry in Nigeria right now who are contradicting that interview with Tucker that Tucker did. Yeah. So I have no problem with that conversation. My conversation, what I was trying to do is focus on your side of the issues with Judaism and Ben Shapiro. And
I didn't enter this conversation bringing up like I wasn't coming from this. I wasn't coming to this from like a Jewish approach.
No, nothing here. So my conversation was really just trying to focus on the other side of the issue. I've said some of these criticisms, Tucker. I didn't have really. I've support. We've had Ben on the show. We like Ben. So all that stuff. I was just trying to have a conversation.
Ben's a better person to ask the
yeah.
He knows.
You aren't Ben. You aren't representing Ben. All that stuff. My point was in this, and then we got to wrap up, was just like, if Ben is in America trying to define conservatism apart from Christ, then that's just not a good definition of conservatism.
When maybe practical, you asked for practical stuff a minute ago, and I think one thing I don't know for sure, but like the concern I think that we would have would be when you start drifting from Orthodox Christianity, even with, again, I've been defending Ben as an ally, to the extent that he wants to uphold 10 Commandments and Torah and things like that.
He likes free markets and all that stuff.
All kinds of things we agree on, and so I'm grateful for that. But the more you drift from Christianity, you end up with conservatives, for example, congratulating Dave Rubin
right,
and his homosexual
and which
partner,
Ben Shapiro did,
and how they they rented a womb and purchased a baby, a boutique baby.
And the Blaze did,
and
a bunch of conservatives.
I don't know if Ben Shapiro personally congratulated them, but I would say there's a bunch of conservatives, PragerU, a bunch of them came out, and the Blaze, and it's like
Glenn Beck did.
So that would be the concern. Would practically be, I think, as you drift from Christianity, full orb Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, even though I could point to some things in the Old Testament to someone who's an Orthodox Jew and be like, hey, bro, God created them male and female. Marriage is one man, one woman. I could point them to that, but I think, but our concern would be, as people drift from Christ and from the New Testament in particular,
we're going to get far away from it.
The Old Testament gets blurrier and blurrier, and I think then you start having conservatives, so-called conservatives, say, hey, there's a booth here, gays against groomers. It's like, well, I think I'm.
We got to pick up this conversation another time.
Oh, we got to go.
Yakoby. Thank you so much for coming on CrossPolitic.
Hey,
for the last time to ever say yes to coming on CrossPolitic again.
You are a very good sport.
I was ambushed.
That's pretty much how our show runs.
I sat down and you're like, yeah, we're Christian actors. I thought you were like kidding, and then
oh no, that's no joke. That's real.
We're only.
No, we really are.